I do believe that strongly. It's a great thing that alternative education does exist, and I hope, in the future, as education keep evolving for secondary, that they don't eliminate these type of programs, because it does give a lot of students who are hopeless or who feel, or even their parents, sometimes the parents are frustrated too because the traditional setting is not working out for their child. And this is like their last effort to try to, get their child path redirected. And so it brings a lot of hope. And to see them come into the program, might not be doing it well in the beginning, and see a student actually at the end of the semester, even if it's like go up one letter grade, in the classes, that's a big accomplishment. That gives them hope that, okay, I can do next semester. Okay, I can do the next semester. Then before you know it, they'll be graduating high school. So, that's a great thing. Yeah. Hope, to me, resonates throughout alternative education.
I'm Nikki Herda, and this is Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms, a podcast where we celebrate our state's educators and explore the future of learning. Bright is brought to you in part by Mimic Insurance Company, insuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit mimic.com/quote to see how much you can save. In today's episode of Bright, I chat with Danielle Bell, a teacher for Romulus Virtual Learning Center. Danielle sheds light on some common misconceptions about virtual learning, explores why hope is such a critical part of her job as a teacher in an alternative setting, and offers 3 tips on this topic for her fellow educators.
All right. Well, Danielle, thanks so much for joining me on the Bright podcast today. It's a pleasure to have you. I was wondering if you could tell me about a moment you vividly remember falling in love with education.
The time where I fell in love with education is actually when I was student teaching. This is back maybe over 10 years, 11 years ago. And my students, they were struggling with stoichiometry and chemistry, balancing equations and things. Yeah. And so I Googled something fun. It was a candy lab. And I had one student in particular who I remember who was really, really struggling with, the chemistry subject, period, with his sciences. He thanked me for doing the project, not so much for the candy. They were able to eat it afterwards, but just learning just basic concepts, like something that was hard because I was just teaching it the regular way they teach you to teach stoichiometry, which is complex to me for high school students. But with this one project, it used candy. Certain candies represented certain elements like carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur. And then I had wood toothpicks, which represented different type of bonds, single bonds, double bonds, triple bonds. And so it was able to bring it more to a basic level where they were able to understand it. And this one student, he was really, really appreciative. And after that one particular lab that I did, which was a basic lab, I went back to a more complex lab. He actually started paying attention more in my classroom. He actually started coming to my classroom more because this particular student had a history with skipping, unfortunately. And, that's when I was like, wow, okay, I like education. Okay, I'm going to make an impact in some of these students' lives. And so that's when it kind of really clicked for me that, okay, I chose, the right profession, the right major, et cetera. So.
Well, that's really cool to hear. And it sounds like, that student really appreciated the effort you put in to help them understand, and make it more engaging for them. What informed your journey through education? So you started off, it sounds like, teaching face-to-face in your student teaching. And at some point you made a pivot into virtual teaching. You want to tell us a little bit about that and kind of what led you down this path and what you like about virtual teaching?
Well, my background is small as far as in-person teaching. I in-person taught during my student teaching, and then I taught briefly under a year as far as in person, face-to-face or person-to-person. Then I decided to pivot into virtual education. My prior experience with virtual education, I taught as a community college professor,
Oh, cool.
WCC Wayne County Community. It's only one semester, and I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. We did the labs in person, of course, but all the lectures were mostly virtual. We had every 2 weeks we had a class of 6 hours. So that gave me a brief, introduction to what, even though it was in high school or secondary, it was college. It gave me my first introduction into virtual world, Blackboard, how
Yeah.
students are engaging virtually. And I actually really liked it a lot. And so I tried to break into it before, had a difficult time because of limited experience. The good thing about the pandemic with education had to kind of change in order to make sure that all the students across the US and actually across the world would keep learning, so that learning wasn't disrupted for elementary, middle, or high school students. Virtual learning isn't for every student, I have to admit, even though with the pandemic at one point, all students were totally virtual because that was the only way that they could keep
Yes.
the learning going without disrupting it because of the COVID-19. But I like it. And some of my students, I would say a good portion of my students, they love it too. You have to be disciplined, with the virtual learning as a student. Because your teacher, we have structure to our program, but it's different than in-person learning where your teacher is in front of you. And so students can fall off, sometime with the virtual aspect or fall behind easier. But I like it for the students who are more motivated. It's a great avenue, that's independent thinkers, independent learners. They have no problems. Some of the challenge students that I've had this semester, that they started off with problems because for them it was different. It might not been, they thought, put it this way, what they thought virtual learning was going to be was different than what they thought it was going to be. You're not going to be at home playing video games on Snapchat. You actually got to do school, and you got to spend hours, just like if you physically went to school, say from 7 to 3, you're doing the same thing, but you're in front of your laptop. You're going to see your teachers. You have to be creative as being an educator. So that way your students will actually learn, especially my subject area, so they actually learn what I'm supposed to be teaching. Sometimes you got to redo things because you might do a lesson and it might not go too well because they don't understand. But I really like it. I love learning. I love new ways of teaching students virtually. And it's challenging. Probably a lot of people that do virtual teaching probably have the same, you got to be adaptive. You got to always be growing. You always got to be learning. And with technology, period, technology changes constantly. Nothing stays constant, So what I know now virtually as a teacher, say if this is still around another 10 years, it's going to be totally different, or even another
Yeah.
year or two. So.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that perspective. I think so much of what you said resonates, just hearing, especially like having interviewed a lot of teachers across the pandemic and hearing about just how adaptive they've truly had to be. Today, we are going to be talking about alternative students, students who are in an alternative classroom. And I know different students are drawn to this setting for different reasons. And I was wondering, to start off, if you might tell us a little bit about what different situations a student might encounter that would lead them to an alternative education setting.
It can be several reasons. It could be that, some students unfortunately are kind of antisociable, maybe can't handle some classes, depending on the districts, you might have 30 to 40 students in a class. And for some students learning, that's too many students, and it's hard for them to learn with one teacher, teaching. So they might need a smaller environment, which, virtual learning, I have 51 students. So versus me having 40 times, 30 to 40 times 5 to 6, sections, I have way less students. So you do get more one-on-one. So that's one reason where they might draw to virtual learning and also to an alternative setting. Also, the students might be having behavioral problems in school where they are not focusing. They might be, acting out in a sense. So that's another reason why they might end up in alternative, education or learning. It could be bullying. I know I had one or two students, unfortunately, they were getting bullied in school or intimidated more or less by students, and that interfered with them learning. So that's why they ended up, in our program, alternative program. We also have some students who are special education students, and some that aren't necessarily been labeled as special education, but they're having a difficult time with the traditional setting of learning. So that's another reason why they might end up, being an alternative ed student. And then some students also, as far as in credits, they fall behind in their high school credits. And so that's why alternative education programs exist, so they won't drop out of high school. So that's another, reason why, student end up in the setting. The challenges that they might face is just redirecting them. Coming from a traditional setting into an alternative setting can be challenging for a lot of it. It is challenging for a lot of the students as far as in getting back on track with the learning. And myself as an educator and also my colleagues that I work with, we have to make sure that we're always seeking different teaching techniques because every student learns differently. No student learned the same, way. And so as an educator, even myself, you have to find ways to help them learn so they'll understand the material. The biggest challenge I think I find is the students really, the mindset, getting them back focused, because most times when they leave a regular setting, they're not as focused. That's why they're an alternative, in an alternative setting. It's just redirecting them and getting them back on the right path of learning and also getting them interested where they're going to be successful and actually, complete a semester or a class and multiple classes, then they can actually, go on to graduate. So,
Yeah. It's kind of cool. I can see the parallel with that first story you shared, with the stoichiometry lab and the candy activity, and just how that's like a real skill set that you bring, and just finding those students in the places that maybe they're starting to fall through the cracks and like kind of supporting them there and re-engaging them. And so I can see how that lends itself well to, the virtual setting, where you can see, it sounds like, right, like, okay, it's this physics lab that's holding the student up. Let's see if we can help them understand it and help them get through it and keep them engaged. So that's pretty cool to hear. Thanks for sharing.
welcome.
One thing when we were originally talking, about this topic and your passion for helping students in the alternative setting, a word that kept surfacing was hope, and just, why that's so important in this particular setting. And I was just wondering if maybe, given that it's the title of this episode, if you'd want to just tell us a little bit about why you think hope is so important in the alternative setting and bringing hope to these students.
I think hope is so important in alternative settings because most of these students, this is their last chance, like the way, I shouldn't probably say it this way, but it's the reality. This is the last step for the students before, if this doesn't work, most of the times the students are going to drop out of high school, 9 times out of 10, if this doesn't, succeed, or they might choose another program that might meet their needs better. But if they don't, they might just totally just, lose hope and drop out of school. And one thing I do love about like our program, or even just looking, we had graduations recently for our alternative ed, we had it for our GED and adult ed. I just saw so much hope. I saw students from ages 16, not 16, 17, 18. And even like, I know GED is not, is part of the alternative ed program, but we had graduates in their 30s, in their 40s, even up to 60 something, that actually graduated, right? And so, if alternative education didn't exist, and we got so many different types of alternative education, that exist besides the school where I work at. Think about how many people wouldn't even get a high school diploma. And so listening to the stories, it was 3 graduates who spoke at our graduation, just what challenges they had to just life challenges on top of trying to get their high school diploma and GEDs. It was just amazing. It almost brought tears, to a lot of our eyes, I won't give into details due to confidentiality. Otherwise, I would be, a little bit more specific. But I'm just glad that the program where I'm at exists and that they are graduating high school students, the ones who are graduating on time, and then say the ones who do fall through the cracks and become adults, if they transition later in life, they're graduating people where, they're getting their high school diplomas or GEDs and they feel proud. I know the one thing all of them said, they felt so proud of themselves of accomplishing that. They felt like, they can go to the next point. And I remember one or two students saying that their life has now really begun. They don't dream no more. They can actually make their dreams realities. They got their high school diploma. So, that's what I really love about the population that I work with. And also my colleagues who do the adults who are getting high school diplomas and GEDs is giving them hope. And a lot of them, it's not easy for them to actually push through and obtain it. It's hard. Even like recently, I had a student yesterday to the wire of the grade. I said, look, you're going to finish this, because she was going to give up and she kept trying not to finish these 3 classes. You're 87% done. That's a matter of 1 or 2 assignments, edgenuity, and a final exam. Why are you talking about, I'm going to take the class all over? No. So I just kept bugging her. We text, my program, we do Google Text, because we don't have cell phones, by the district. So we have Google Text, we email. And one thing about the younger generation, they love texting. So I can text my student, they would text me right back right away, that kind of contact. So that's what I really love about my program. I just like to see students who feel like they couldn't accomplish something actually accomplish it. And once they see that too, I'm quite sure when the fall comes around, they're going to be more motivated. And I had one of my students, it was a male student, he actually thanked me. And actually, his father did also, because he was getting all E's. I came in November of last year to this district, and he did all right last report card. That was in January. But it has been a drastic improvement. He got all B's. I think he got like 4 B's and 2 C's. That's a big drastic improvement from when I started. He had mostly D's and E's, right? But I had to push him, though. It wasn't like he was going to naturally do it. I literally had to text. I had to call his father. His father and I, every time I called, it was always a negative report. And I did call him yesterday, and he was like, what's going on? I said, no, this is a good report. He did really well. I wanted him to know, how well his son had done. And so his son was proud, himself. So hopefully it'll carry on into the fall if he decides to stay, part virtual with us. And some of the students might go from virtual back to in person. We'll see, how the numbers change in the fall. But that's what I really like about the alternative ed. Many students who think they can't accomplish anything, they shock themselves. They do much better. And then you have on the flip end, you got some students, unfortunately, that are not going to make it through. You push them, and they just give up. And then too, on the flip end, they have other issues outside that they might not be telling us. That's barriers, why they're not finishing. But the ones who do finish, and especially if they were doing horrible academically when they started, and then they end up with passing grades of C's or B's, that's a big accomplishment,
Wow. I was really moved by what you said about, like, they don't dream anymore. They know how to accomplish and how to reach their dreams. That really struck me. And that's kind of what I'm hearing throughout, the stories that you've been sharing, is that, you're kind of building that self-efficacy. If you have a student who doesn't think that they can do it, you have to hold their hand maybe a little bit and, stay on them to keep them going. But once they figure out that they can do it, they've done it. You have a whole group of students now who you helped prove to themselves that they can, in fact, do it, even if they thought that they couldn't. And, you have to believe that that experience could be so, so important to a student who didn't believe they could do something, just for any of us, when you accomplish something you think that you couldn't do, the way that can influence the rest of the course of your life is so, so critical. Those are like the moments that really define us. So it's so cool to hear that you're, bringing that into your classroom and helping these students. So thank you for the work that you do. I wonder, before we dig into our 3 tips, if you just want to speculate, do you view that, this bringing of hope and this kind of bolstering of hope as, a fundamental part of what it means to be a teacher in an alternative classroom?
So I do believe that strongly. It's a great thing that alternative education does exist, and I hope in the future, as education keep evolving for secondary, that they don't eliminate these type of programs because it does give a lot of students who are hopeless or who feel, or even their parents, sometimes the parents are frustrated too because the traditional setting is not working out for their child. And this is like their last attempt effort to try to, get their child path redirected. And so it brings a lot of hope, a lot of hope. And also the educators, you feel more hopeful, as you every semester, say fall, winter, if you do summer school, you meet many students, many personalities. And to see, especially when you have, like I have 51 students, and say you might have a couple where they're not really doing well academically when they come in your program, and they might not have good study skills. Some of the students, they're behind, in certain areas, based off of where they went to school. And to see them come into the program, might not be doing it well in the beginning, and then you're intervening, doing some type of intervention, teaching techniques or things, also working with the counselors, because we work closely with our counselors as well. And see a student actually at the end of the semester, even if it's like go up 1 letter grade, in the classes, that's a big accomplishment, that gives them hope that, okay, I can do next semester. Okay, I can do the next semester. Then before you know it, they'll be graduating high school. So, that's a great thing. So, yeah. Hope, to me, resonates throughout alternative education.
I'm Nikki Herda, and you're listening to Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. Bright is brought to you in part by MEMIC Insurance Company, insuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit memic.com/quote to see how much you can save. Today, I'm chatting with Danielle Bell, a teacher for Romulus Virtual Learning Center. Up next, we dive into Danielle's top 3 tips for bringing hope into the alternative classroom.
For this episode, we're going to dig into your top 3 tips for bringing hope into the alternative education setting. And so I was wondering if you want to kick us off for your first piece of advice that you'd give to other alternative education teachers who are looking to bring hope into their classrooms.
The 3 tips of bringing hope into the classroom.
Yes.
One of the first one is you have to be very patient. And that's as an educator, period. Sure. But in alternative ed, you have to be, to me, more patient. Just like special education is another area with a lot of patience as well. But you have to really be patient because you're not going to always see the results come instantly. You know how sometimes you go to help, you just figure, this, because I have some students, I can help minimally, they fall right in line. However, you got some students, like, for instance, I'm going to give an example, a quick example. Our program ended up yesterday was our last day for our semester, or for the winter term. So we had a deadline of May the 25th for them. So what we decided to do is actually make it. That wasn't really the true date that the program ends, but we didn't want to end it on the date that it ended, which is yesterday, because we noticed from the first semester, we have, especially our students, they struggle sometime to finish online. Yep. And instead, you give them the actual date, and say if you have a couple people who are struggling, they're not going to finish, And so I had about 24 of my students finish May 25th, which was like 2.5 weeks ahead of program. So that's, that was wonderful. But back to the patience part, I had some students, I kept extending it a week by week, which was technically still early, right? And I extended it all the way to what the real deadline is. And, to say to the last minute where my grades were due for 3 of my students, you have to have a lot of patience, dealing with alternative ed. You can't just, put a certain time frame and say, okay, they're going to meet this task. You almost have to, you have to have patience. If you don't have patience, you will not be able to do education, period. But adult education or alternative ed, which I work under, is even more challenging because those students have other issues compounded plus the learning to meet the task. So that's one thing I will tell the teachers entering alternative ed as far as bringing the hope in a classroom. The second thing, you always have to be a mentor and inspire these students because they have so much. And I should say in the last 2 years, I think all the students in the world have suffered so much being in the pandemic, mentally, psychologically, just been through so much, more than typical students prior to the pandemic. You have to, with our population, especially alternative ed, you're a teacher, you're going to have to be a mentor. You have to continue to inspire them despite what else is going on. And so that's one thing, another reason where you do hope. Like myself, I don't do quotes in the morning, but I have a colleague, she actually sent out motivational quotes to her students. What I do, I have had some students who've told me about, personal challenges they've had, and I will reach out to them sometimes just to do a wellness check on them. Sure. As far as in just trying to inspire them to keep going, because that's what they need. Like most times people just look at the academic part of education only, but you're looking at the whole child. And I used to work in health and human services for almost 19 years. So if somebody is having like psychological barriers, parents died or a family member's ill, or, some people might be struggling, to even put food on the table, their parents, you want to bring whatever services, like we might not can do it ourselves, but we do have a way of bringing in the social workers. We have a teen clinic at our school, or if they need a counselor, or even if they might need something with public assistance, getting a bridge card or SNAP cards and bringing food into the household, you try to be a mentor and you try to inspire hope. And that's another thing with alternative ed that you're going to find yourself doing. To me, a little bit more, I find myself like you're kind of like a mini social worker plus a teacher, because you're constantly doing that and so they can keep going. Because some students are like, you don't know what I'm going through. This is hard. You don't know. But if they tell you a little bit what they're going through, you'll be like, oh, wow. So you have to constantly bring some type of inspiration to try to keep them motivated, even though they might be going through other personal situations, so they can actually finish, not just do a little bit and then just stop, for the rest of the semester. So that's another key thing. I would say just you have to be, bring inspiration, bring hope, besides, teaching whatever subject area in alternative education.
So when you're dealing with a student, who's like, they may be saying something like that, like, oh, you don't know what I'm going through. And they're struggling to find, to feel understood maybe, just by the world even, and struggling to find that inspiration themselves. What are some of your kind of like go-to ways that you might, help bring that hope and inspiration to them? Just some of your kind of the common practices that you might do.
Like I said, I do wellness checks. I will text them. I'll pick up the phone and call and ask them, like, how are you doing? How is your morning going? How are you feeling? Because for right now, for some reason, depression is really big among the teens in our and not just in my program, but I think that's everywhere around the U.S. But when one of my kids tell me, oh, I'm not feeling well mentally, I will do a wellness check. And also I offer, services that we have a social worker on staff at the school, because I'm not a social worker. So that way I'll give the information, to the social worker so they can reach out to the student. I also, let the student know if you don't want to talk to me, because, sometimes they don't want to tell you exactly what's going on, but they might say, I'm just not feeling well mentally, I'm depressed. I let them know about our teen center, and then also always tell them self-care is real important, because I know some of my students, they work, plus they go to school, and they do other things, for their families.
Sure.
So I just try to always say something positive, because sometimes it might not be always depression per se, but they might just feel overwhelmed by, whatever circumstance they're in, and they don't see no way out of whatever they're going through. So I try to always say something positive, like I said, sometimes it's a little deeper than that, where you need the social worker to be involved, or I might talk to their parent or whoever they live there with, their guardian, if it's something, real severe, if you're feeling, based off of what they're telling me, to make sure it's not something where they need, more professional counseling. But I just do wellness checks. That's one of my biggest things. I try to say something positive and always just provide some words of wisdom, of hope, to just try to keep them going.
Would you like to lead us into your third tip?
My third tip, as far as in bringing hope to the students, is trying to put structure in the students' lives, as far as a academic, professional, as a teacher. I mean, you can't put structure in their personal lives because you don't live with them, of course, you're not their parents. But, being in an alternative setting is different than a regular setting. So some of the students figure I can just do whatever I want to do because I'm in an alternative school. There's no order. You have to bring the structure in. So that way, once you bring the structure in, I think everything else falls in place, for the students. Either they're going to rise up to the task or not. So those are like my three tips that I would give to a educator, as far as in bringing hope to alternative ed students.
Awesome. Real quick before we wrap up, any suggestions for how you bring that sort of structure? Just like any examples?
I decided to do virtual meetings like 4 days a week. Because when I first started, we didn't have it. It was just straight Edgenuity. So when the second semester rolled around, it was the end of January, mid-January, after Dr. Martin Luther King Day is when we started the second semester. We, both myself and my co-teacher, we decided to do virtual meetings. And so I noticed my contact with my students became better. Because we have to weekly have contact with them, track them with their progress. Even some of the students, the ones who are more challenging or having challenges, they might not log in like they should. They were made to log in from 7:10 to 2:10, I think is the school day. So they were required to do that and also to do the virtual meetings. But it made the students more accountable, made them log in more, and actually the activity was better, and they actually completed assignments and completed classes, so just that type of structure. Yeah. Also telling them, make sure they have an adequate time for study, because I know virtual learning is different than in-person learning. Before, like I said, we didn't really have that type of structure, where we brought that in to the students, and then it made it more where they are more likely to succeed, not just, oh, you're in a program and you're just not going to finish. You got to actually enroll, and you actually got to get through, and you got to get to point A, semester after semester. So you go from being a freshman to a sophomore, to a junior. So that type of structure.
Thanks. That's helpful to help visualize it and see, how you do that in your classroom. Mm-hmm. All right, last question. Can you tell me about a teacher who had an impact on your life?
Oh my goodness, I got too many. Let me think of one. think of one. Unfortunately, the one I'm gonna talk about, she actually unfortunately died during the pandemic. I loved her to death. Her name was Mrs. Lockridge. My 8th grade teacher, my 5th grade, my 8th grade, and most of my high school teachers. I had wonderful teachers. I was really blessed. She made a really, really big impact in my life. At the time, my mom was having challenges at home financially, and I was one of those kids. I love reading. I guess I'll call myself a nerd. I'll talk about my own self. But this one particular teacher, one thing I loved about her, she made us writing wasn't my favorite area. I was more of an average writer, a B writer, B minus, C plus. So she pushed, she was an English teacher. She pushed me. Oh my gosh, she pushed me where she made me write better, where I write B plus now. Sometimes A minus, but she made my weakness become a strength, you know. And she wasn't my favorite teacher at the time because, I mean, we bumped heads a little bit, you know. I didn't get in trouble, but she used to annoy me sometimes because you know, how some teachers really push you hard because they want the best for you. And she was stern. She was, you know, how some teachers are super, super nice, and you got some teachers who care, but they're real stern. She was very stern when she was my teacher, and probably all her students' teachers. But after I left eighth grade, and you know, look back on it, she was actually my favorite teacher. She really, really pushed me, and you know, years later, when we always, I mean, I keep in contact with my fifth grade, my eighth grade, and a couple high school teachers who all impacted me. But I'm glad she pushed me because how life is, when you're comfortable, you don't really do as well. But when you're uncomfortable, like was telling some of my kids, that's when you actually rise up to the occasion better because it makes you become stronger. And that's what she did for me when it came to writing. And also, I was going through a very challenging point at home. You know, like my mom was going through some things personally I'd rather not really get into. But she recognized the issues just like how I recognized with my students. So, you know, she would bring things in for me that I might need personally. Also, like I said, books and things, like she bought them herself, you know, like her husband was an educator. I think he was a principal as well, if I'm not mistaken. So she had books and all kind of things. So not just for myself, it was some of the other kids, you know. She really, I'm quite sure if there were other students that's grown, we're all well and grown now, that they talk about Mrs. Lockridge, she really, you know, she made a great impact in my life, you know. She did. So whenever I got in uncomfortable situations, when I went to college, even work world, I always thought about her, you know, not to give up. Because I was one of those people that always wanted to give up. And she'd be like, nope, you're going to do it again. No, you're going to do that again. And I used to get upset. I'm telling you, we used to bump heads. But she actually helped prepare me for the real world, you know?
Without a doubt, it's challenging work to bring patience, motivation, and hope to students who, for any number of reasons, didn't thrive in the traditional classroom. But with leaders like Danielle forging our path forward, if there's one thing we're certain of, it's that the future is bright. You know someone who's an inspiring Michigan educator who should be featured on our show? Send us an email at bright@michiganvirtual.org to let us know who they are and why we should interview them. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. This podcast is produced by Kirby Gaylord, is hosted by me, Nikki Herda, and is shaped by many of our passionate and talented colleagues. Big thanks to Krista Green, Ann Perez, Terrence Wilkerson, Anna Arenberry, Sarah Hill, and Branda Batista for their contributions to this episode. Bright is brought to you in part by Mimic Insurance Company, ensuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit mimic.com/quote to see how much you can save. The Bright podcast is made possible by Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization that's leading and collaborating to build learning environments for tomorrow. Education is changing faster than ever. Discover new models and resources to move learning forward at your school at michiganvirtual.org.